This video is for business leaders who recognize the value of continuous improvement when it comes to striving for mastery and the benefits that can deliver to their business. So watch to the end of this video for some bonus material on confirmation bias and how that works, as well as creativity and a recommended video on creativity and mastery in innovation. So this is the final video, or part 4 of Robert Greene's book review, Mastery, that I started a week ago. I had a couple of intermediate mastery related videos in the midst of that. And while this video can stand alone, you'll get more value and more insight from watching the whole series from part 1. In this case, it's less standalone, I would say, than the others, because this is about 3/4 of the way through the book, and it focuses mostly on not only what to pay attention to, but what not to pay attention to in the book, because there's some things that for your mental health and your relationships are best ignored. So I decided to use this picture because whether you recognize this picture or not, I'm assuming you probably recognize this guy here. Yes, this is Leonardo da Vinci. And this bridge, which is a modern bridge that he designed when he was alive. And one of the complaints about this bridge by the city council or whoever has to approve these kind of things was, we think this bridge is too futuristic looking. And yet it was designed by da Vinci, who is, for the most part, the master of masters, which is why I thought it would be a good way to end this series and this week, whose theme is mastery. So in the last episode, I talked about how Robert Greene promotes the advantages of basically screwing others over and how to manipulate them to gain advantage for yourself. I completely disagree with basically all that he says about this, and I think this is an important point, but because I do recommend this book, though I don't recommend many of the reprehensible values, I think he promotes in saying, well, everybody's like this. It's like, well, actually, that's not what the data tells us. So while doing the same unethical Machiavellian things that he does, the problem is it can put you in the best position in the short term, but it's also most of his frames in the book, in the advanced part of the book, the last half in particular, are antisocial, paranoid, and maladaptive mindsets based on deeply negative assumptions about the nature of humanity and people in general. And they are not, as I said, supported by research. This reminds me of the expression, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on you, or shame on me, sorry. So this is kind of where this goes. And because Greene repeats this over and over in his books, I can't say that he is the person that he promotes these values, who is the person who actually behaves on the values he promotes, but he promotes them consistently through all 3 of his books that I've read, and he's deeply misinformed about certain subjects, in particular around psychology and certain other things that I am knowledgeable about, so I can express my relatively well-informed opinion about these things. So his perspectives are akin to what Adam Grant would call takers in his book, Give and Take, which is another book that is excellent, but certainly has a more positive spin on human potential and how we should behave with others, and is, unlike much of Greene's stuff, research-backed rather than presumption-backed, to give it a simple term. So I like him because he's got a more positive mindset, but also because he's doing it from a point of empirical evidence rather than whatever Greene draws from, which isn't clear. Seems to be a lot of paranoia and perhaps some psychopathology. So his mindset, that is Adam Grant's, is how can we help each other succeed better and expand the pie? If you do this, as opposed to the frames that Greene proposes in Mastery and all his books that I've listened to so far, you will tend to be happier and by extension healthier, both mentally and physically, because it feels good to do good. It feels bad to do bad for most people, even people with really compromised ethics tends to have psychological problems, especially assuming everybody is out to get you and screw you over, and you doing the same makes real healthy relationships basically impossible. So Grant's research shows some surprising things, and that is that givers are actually more likely to be taken advantage of than takers. That is, by being more paranoid, you're less likely to get taken, and by being a giver, you are more likely to be taken advantage of. That's probably not a surprise, but maybe a disappointment. It was to me. But givers are also more likely to be more successful long-term and overall than takers as a result of having generosity and kindness rather than paranoia and manipulation at the center of their motivations and their behavior. So Greene really should have stayed in his lane, especially when he talks about psychology and neuroscience, evolution, synesthesia, and creativity. I say this because I have knowledge of those subjects. My background is neuroscience and psychology. I've done lots of study into evolution, synesthesia, and I have lived as a creative and studied creativity for about 35 years now. While Greene is brilliant and a great writer, actually, I like his writing. And I learned a lot about various creative masters that he mentions in the book Mastery. He also ranges from highly speculative to completely wrong on about 50% of what he says on the above topics. So what I would say is for you to, or what I would recommend is that you ignore his long-winded pseudoscientific description of how intuition works, because it's bullshit. It's not based on reality. I don't know what it's based on, but it's not based on the scientific evidence. I can tell you that. So I would say instead, watch this video. And I believe, oh, it's not a, I'm going to find the, try to find the YouTube equivalent so you can watch it here. And if it's not there, it will certainly also be in the description about the way people make decisions and the way intuition really works in the real world. Or, and another one you can do, and this is a Wikipedia link I will put into the description, listen to or read Daniel Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow to get an in-depth understanding, especially about System 1 and System 2, which are the System 1 is the fast thinking, System 2 is the slow thinking, deliberate practice part of your brain. So it really tells you the way these things work a lot better than Greene does in his books. So I would say keep everything that Greene says about specific habitual behaviors you should engage in and the time they take to achieve mastery. You can keep that stuff. It's good. It's solid. It's one of the things about Greene's very cynical and paranoid view is he doesn't sugarcoat things. He might coat them in blood or whatever you want to call it. But when he talks about the reality of the effort and the time it takes to become a master, he is very accurate about that. So that part is really, really good. As I think I said in one of my previous videos, the best book that I'm aware of that is honest about that aspect of this topic, which most people go, oh, it's just easy, just do this and you'll be there in about 10,000 or more hours, which more people are starting to attempt to debunk, but I don't see any of them actually demonstrating the kind of mastery they say has nothing to do with the 10,000 hours that most world or international level experts have invested to become masters themselves. So do what he advises about embracing complexity, striving intensely to improve at the top edge of your skill. That's totally solid and based in research or supported by research. And if you can, apprentice under masters if you can find them. Masters or mentors, if you can find them. That's harder and harder in this world, but do your best if you can. That's a huge advantage And if you can't, you're going to have to, and you should anyway, do what he suggested, which is creating your own apprenticeship through your life by engineering your career path. So your own career path, use that or gear that towards a long-term apprenticeship, which will lead you to mastery in whatever you're most passionate about doing. Because remember, you can't be a master at everything. You can only be a master at one or a few things. So you have to be very careful and focused on that. What you can do is you can skip his paranoid, sociopathic, Machiavellian perspective on social dynamics, because even though some parts of them are real, they're mostly just deeply negative and departed from psychologically healthy reality. So his ideas about the world as quotations, the world, and this is his exact words, the world as a court of scheming intrigue. It's worth paying attention to this because he's talking about things like the French royal court and all these other things that his other books talk about, like the 48 laws of power. It's worth paying attention to because such people and environments are dysfunctional and the exception, but do exist. Some people are shitty human beings who put themselves and their interest above everybody else and do so in a deeply unethical way and are conniving. So it's good to know that these people exist in the way they think. And if Greene isn't one of these people, he certainly has a deep understanding and knowledge of how such people think. I'll leave it to you. I've never met the guy. I probably never will, to decide whether that's who he is or just something he's studied. There's a difference between being a sociopath and being an expert about them. I haven't decided either way, but I would be very cautious about developing a relationship with him myself until I was convinced otherwise. So as I said, it's worth learning from such people to learn how they think, because they're real and they are very dangerous people to be involved with. So it's good to sort of know the warning signs. So like I said, you can identify these sort of antisocial few and steer clear of them or prevent them from coming into your life whenever possible, or if needs be, defend yourself against them if necessary. That is, know what they're likely to be doing by reading things like any of Greene's books to be aware of that and have some idea what they might be doing when you interact with them. So probably the most concerning part, though, has nothing to do with his potentially sociopathic tendencies. It's his misconception that Greene expresses that committing to a path of mastery and following it will, and another quote, cause you to subconsciously make the right choices. This is wholly magical thinking. Let's just call it horse shit. But, think Santa Claus level reality, and I'll put a link in the description about a Wikipedia article as to what magical thinking is, but you can probably guess from the context. So, ironically, people who happen to succeed from a given decision often find themselves convinced that it was somehow providence, that they were meant to be, that they were born under a special star, or whatever pseudoscientific silliness you want to believe in, that they are amazing through their own confirmation bias and a single decision they made that happened to work out. And the reason I'm talking about it is it aligns with the idea of make a decision that you want to be on this path and you'll find the right decisions. They'll just come to you. You just know in your gut. Horse shit. That's not the reality. But confirmation bias very often makes it seem so for many people who believe something and desperately want, and pursue verification of what they already believe, rather than the truth or the disconfirmation of such beliefs. So they conveniently forget many of the decisions. This is anybody who does this and is convinced that they are somehow destined. They can conveniently forget many of the decisions they make that don't work out, and so grossly overestimate their understanding, talent, or gut instinct based on a single or very few events which they selectively and disproportionately remember, that did work out. This is the essence of confirmation bias, which I talk about a lot in a lot of my videos because it's important. It's the kind of thing that allows many people who are considered experts to continue to pretend to be experts while having very little knowledge or scientific verification of anything they do. So I've seen posts on LinkedIn from a person who's worth $350 million. This person thinks their gut is their key to success. While it's not impossible, because in certain restricted situations, that is what you have the most experience at and the most knowledge in and the most skill in, plus a predictable genre, that is a predictable area with which you can develop your skill, and feedback to calibrate your gut or your intuition against, it's possible. It's just rarely the case. It's almost always confirmation bias instead. So it may be that their gut is the reason they're worth $350 million, but it's more likely far more complex and less dependent on the factor of their intuition than they think. So thank you for watching this far. We've reached the bonus material, and this is more about confirmation bias and things like that. So the fact that people believe this kind of stuff shouldn't be confused with what I'll call earned intuition based on extensive knowledge, experience, feedback, practice, and something that has a predictable pattern to it. Gambling is not one of those things. Gambling is random, so you cannot develop an accurate earned intuition. So I'll leave a link in the description as to a TED Talk by Liv Bory, who is amazing intellectual and, ironically, a professional poker player. And poker has predictable patterns that are not random. So earned intuition, unlike that superstitious intuition, is gold, but it's earned and developed, not an inborn talent. And it's very much like any other kind of mastery. It's basically judgment mastery within a specific area of which you have extensive experience and knowledge. So one example of somebody I think who probably has really good earned intuition would be Ray Dalio. He comes to mind because as someone who's probably, I think, one of the most developed earned intuitive people alive, he's constantly talking about, especially on LinkedIn, he's posting about how he objectively verifies things, how to see yourself and others realistically, how to encourage people to discredit your position if they have credible reason. That is really, really checking your intuitions and your judgments against reality, and encouraging and promoting and even requiring, if you've read Principles, you know what I mean, requiring in the contract that people, if they have a disconfirming opinion and it's well informed and it's based on something, they're required by contract to tell him or tell anyone, or they may be fired for not doing so. So that's almost certainly the reason his intuition is as good as it is, because he's always seeking to confirm it objectively outside of his own judgment. So we're going to go back to Greene now. And so Greene uses way too much absolute language in this book. You must do this. You can only ... And that's dangerous because nothing is everything. Every time someone says must, always, only, it's almost always completely wrong or has some very clear exceptions, which when you apply that absolute language to it, you are now going down a path which is completely wrong, because you assume that everything follows these oversimplified rules that tend to use absolute language. Be very careful of absolute language in your own life and the rules and principles you live by. So sometimes I agree with what he says, but oftentimes I don't. He says things like, you should always accept people at as they are and not judge them. But observe how they behave, something to that gist. And I agree with that completely. You should always strive to do that. But that's different than saying you should always trust your gut, which is absolute nonsense. And the Live Breathe video should make that very clear to you. So he talks about topics and details that contradict my own experience. And if I have to choose between my own studied experience and life experience and what he says and the research on the same topics, but in particular, he says the things he says about creativity just do not align with the decades of study and my own activity as a creative have shown me. So he seems to me as though he's speaking about as somebody who has studied creativity, has very strong opinions about creativity, but shows no real evidence of actually having direct experience of creativity. That is, he's a writer. So some people would argue that's creativity, and it's not creative. But the way he speaks or the way he describes things in this book indicates to me he is not much of a creative at all, based against my own experience as a lifelong creative. So he says Darwin could have only come to his conclusions about evolution by ... I don't remember the detail, but it's sort of like the only way Darwin could have come to this conclusion is this. And I have counterexamples to that in my own life. I've decided to leave out because this video is going to be long as it is. Bottom line is, there is more than one way to come to a specific conclusion, and to think otherwise is to think two-dimensionally, simplistically, and probably with a sort of reductionist, ignorant sort of perspective. I thought of, it's like, no, that's not true. There's multiple ways Darwin could have come to the conclusions that he did, and he came to them. So to put it bluntly, it shows to me the author actually lacks the creativity to think laterally the way he clearly does not, but masters and creatives do. Is he a master of writing? I think he's a really good writer. Is it creative? Is he a creative? I would say in the general broad sense, no, because his writing and what he says about creativity aren't in alignment with what many creatives I have known, not just myself, and many creatives I've studied, says no, he really doesn't seem to know what he's talking about. He's speculating and I think parroting other people's ideas, which seem to be fairly misinformed from the data. So it's a brilliant book whose core about what it takes to achieve mastery is spot on. Unfortunately, many of his details are either completely wrong or mere outsider speculation on a topic that I don't think he understands very well. So we're finished the bonus material at that, and the recommended video for today is, and I can put this one here and we'll put it in the description as well, is to Innovate by Disintegrating the Box. That's about how creativity really works by yours truly. So I hope you enjoy that video. So if you've learned anything from this video, if you enjoyed it, please share the love by sharing this video. Thanks. So this has been Crush It Club 237, Mastery by Robert Greene, Book Review, Part 404. That's the end of this week, whose theme was Mastery. Check back next week to find out what next week's theme is, because I'm a creative and I haven't decided what it is yet. I'm still thinking about it. My name is Tim B. Green. Bye for now.